is navigating clinical trials. We're going to have, this is going to be kind of a two-part. So we have Marie Francos, LPN2, and a bunch of other certifications. She's going to be doing a brief PowerPoint and talk to you about navigating clinical trials. And then we're going to have Dr. Patel, Dr. Aralou, and Dr. Sato. Dr. Sato, can you come up here and be on the panel? Sorry. And so they're going to be answering your direct questions about ocular melanoma clinical trials. So Marie's going to be talking to you about how to navigate your clinical trials, and then anything specific to OM, you can direct to the doctors.
Okay.
Okay?
All
Great.
right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marie Francos, and I work at Orlando Health as a clinical research coordinator. I've been there for about 3 years, working in melanoma sarcoma clinic. Can I go next slide? So why do clinical trials? Clinical trials provide answers to scientific questions that we're all looking for. They provide another alternative to prevent, diagnose, or treat medical conditions. Also, it helps the future. So by you joining a clinical trial could help us later on down the road with other diagnoses and treatments. There are a couple types of clinical trials, and the biggest one is the interventional, where there's medical drugs with or without placebo, and device clinical trials. There's also observational, which we're just monitoring the outcomes that have occurred on previous clinical trials. We have 4 different types, stages for clinical trials. The first one is safety. So phase 1 is what we're looking for, is safety and efficacy on clinical trials. And then phase 2, we want to know how well the new treatments are working. Phase 3, we want to compare those new treatments to standard treatment. And then phase 4, those are to evaluate long-term, and these are typically FDA-approved clinical trials. And sometimes this kind of looks at observational, just long-term. So, and most of the time, PIs, physicians, will combine phase 1, 2, and 3, and a lot of times they do this to just have a better transition through the different phases of the clinical trials. So when you're participating in a clinical trial, we follow what is known as a protocol. Within this protocol, it is like our Bible for the clinical trial, and it will involve an inclusion and exclusion, patient safety and rights. They'll have your specific procedures, a length of the study, and informed consent. Inside the informed consent, you're going to want to make sure that all of this information is spelled out before you sign on to the clinical trial. If it is not, you can get with the physician and the coordinator at that time and ask all of those questions. Length of a study, typically they're about 2 years, if not more. And then, at any time for patient safety and rights, just because you've signed an informed consent, you do not have to stay on that clinical trial. You do have the right to withdraw at any time. And even if you withdraw just from the treatment portion of it, you can continue to follow through just for follow-up and standard of care and see how that goes with the clinical trial. All right, and now we're going to go to the clinicaltrials.gov, and I'm going to show you kind of how to navigate through everything. Anybody can use this website if we can get it. It is clinicaltrials.gov. Are there any questions while the computer is thinking? I'm sorry? This is a really old computer.
Are the
Sure.
clinical trials only once your ocular melanoma has metastasized?
No, absolutely not. Once you find out that you've been diagnosed with that, you can speak with your physician to decide, what are your options for treatment. If clinical trial is an option, then you can definitely look into enrolling in one. Mm-hmm. All right, so this is the main screen here, and to make it a little easier, we'll just type in ocular melanoma. All right, and we're going to go to look at the recruiting studies. This website will have every possible study that you can think of. All right, and we're just going to click on any one of the studies. Okay, and then I like to use a tabular view. It's a little easier. But you will have an overview of the clinical trial and what they're looking for. You could get the information from your physician about the exact disease diagnosis that you have, and that will help you figure out, which kind of study you need to look for. We can scroll down. All right, so we know that this study here, they're looking to enroll about 800 patients. And then as far as inclusion and exclusion, this is a very, very easy one. They're looking for anyone who's 18 or older. And then, like I said, you're going to have to get some of this information from your physician. And then with exclusion, you might be able to answer yourself, if you have this information or not. And then if we scroll back up to the top, it says contacts and location. We click on that, it will show you every single location that this site is enrolling at. And then typically they will have next to the site an email or a phone number that you can contact the clinical research coordinator at that site to see if they are accepting new patients onto that clinical trial. Okay, are there any questions? No? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. The problem is, all clinical trials, I'm sorry, but human experiment. So there's no point data, there's no assurance. So doctors and then patient work together to find something new for the future patient. Of course, the patient himself. It's very challenging. Yeah. So I think if you go to different places, doctors choose different kind of treatment. Doctors very active, so she may go talk about several trials, and then if you can't reject, clinical trials. So I think it's very frustrating. So if one of you has some, experience, you can share. But basically, very important source is your primary doctor, your eye doctor, and probably you might have to visit some institution where you trust to talk about the pros and cons. And the critical question is how many patients is enrolled, how many patients have some response. But early phase 1, they will say, we don't know. It's very difficult. And also when we check the clinicaltrial.gov, And then there's many number name. Even myself doesn't know what is that. So you have to search it. Okay, this is some c-MET inhibitor. Okay, ALK inhibitor. What is that? You have to keep searching, and then even medical professionals can sometimes difficult. So I think what you can do is just bring information by yourself, and then do some homework as fast as you can, and then try to put yourself a little up to talk to the study doctor. And then you have to ask a couple questions. Do you know any rationale in doing it? Do you have any early response? Do you have any side effect? And then, do you think my wife, my son, my husband can tolerate? Then you have to decide, what we should do. So I think a very important thing is Dr. Patel doing every day, just sit down and talk. And we can't tell the answer, you're going to respond. You're going to survive forever. This is all kind of day by day. 5 years from now, some of the clinical trials are approved. Then any doctor can use it. But at this moment, it goes step by step. And it's very challenging. Even clinical trial doctor themselves doesn't know whether can be helpful or not. But at this couple sites, you can go and Jefferson, we're doing a lot of liver adjective treatment. Dr. Patel is going to talk a little bit. Mehmet Anderson is very creative also, and then Rich Carvajal, his life is giving a cure patient by melanoma. A couple of locations where you might at least spend some time. But eventually you have to decide whether that is worth doing, and then whether toxicity is okay to do it. Just kind of beginning talk.
Yeah. Sometimes we share a lot of patients at these different hospitals. Thank you. Is this better? It sounds the same to me. Is that better? So we share a lot of patients between the few hospitals that really see a high volume of this cancer. And many patients will say, how come you don't have the same clinical trials that Dr. Carvajal has or that Dr. Sato has? And we don't have an FDA-approved therapy. So we don't have a standard of care on which to add something and improve. So right now it really is best if we are sort of like spokes on a bicycle wheel and we're all kind of going in a little bit of a different direction. And when the therapy that ends up being, a game changer or a winner starts to show promise, gets approval, then we can all start using that therapy and start adding to it and seeing. But until that point, I think it's in our best interest if we all are doing a little bit different. In medical research, it's often, 7+ years. The old time was 14 years from a drug to be in early development to approval if it worked. And 14 years is far too long a journey. If we were all following the same drug company, the same trial, and then 14 years later deciding, nope, this one didn't work, no, this one didn't work. So it really is better if we have a little bit more of a shotgun style approach. And Dr. Sato and Dr. Roglu can tell you, we don't have an ego about this. If his clinical trial happens to be the best one, I will fall in line and start using that as well. So that's often something people ask is, why don't you have the same options, and how are we supposed to decide from this menu of options? And I agree with everything he said. You have to think about eligibility, the schedule, what are the side effects. One thing that is very difficult for us to talk about when a clinical trial is being run is it working? So these trials are essentially embargoed from releasing data ahead of time before set endpoints, partly because we could influence or coerce your decision to participate. So if we start telling you, yes, this drug is really working, that can be seen as a form of coercion if then that's the reason why you decided to join the trial. And if at the end it doesn't work for everybody, then it could be a little bit problematic. And by the same token, if we were to tell people this one doesn't seem to be working at all, we could really slow enrollment. So Dr. Sato knows my mentor in uveal melanoma was a physician known as Dr. Bedikian, Egot Bedikian. And he was very kind of black and white about it. And he said, listen, you should not cherry pick who goes on your clinical trial. If the patient meets the eligibility and has none of the exclusion and they want it, you put them on. And I do see colleagues doing this quite a bit, saying, well, I'm saving this trial for the younger patients, or this one for the ones who don't have it in their liver. And really, that's not the objective way to see if the treatment works. You know, if you meet the eligibility and you don't have any exclusion and you want on the trial, we should do everything possible to put you on that trial. So that's my only hesitation. And when people say, you know, is this drug working? Should I do this one? Should I not? I can't really influence your decision to do it other than telling you the eligibility, the schedule, the side effects, and so forth. And when data is publicly released, then we certainly can share it.
So then as a patient, eligibility or not being eligible, how do you make a decision?
Yeah.
I mean, how
We need one more.
how are we expected? So you're faced with 2 or 3 options of trials. There's no data to support whether one's being more effective or another. All we know is that either you qualify or you don't qualify. That's all you have to go off. So how does a patient go about determining then I'm going to pick A over B or B over C? How do you do that?
I'm going to answer briefly and then pass the microphone. You know, this is where I think things like what's the burden to your time off work, off family, what's the schedule of the treatment? Is it something where you come once a week for an infusion? Do you have to be hospitalized? Is it an oral therapy? Start asking yourself if any of those things matter, you know, the interruption.
That's just convenience then, right? I mean, that's all that is.
Yeah, but as Dr. Sato mentioned, this is human experimentation, right? We don't know that one is better than another. So if we don't have any of that information that we can publicly share, then it becomes, I mean, convenience matters, right? That's quality of life to some degree. But the other thing I tell patients is this is the time to have maybe some faith in your medical team and say, I need your help making this decision. What would you like to start me on? It's almost as if, you know, I have friends who go to the mechanic, and if the mechanic says, do you want an inline engine or a V engine? You know, if you don't know the difference, this is where you have to rely on them to kind of help you. Which one would be best? Which one do you think I should do?
But I presume that you're making the same decisions off the non-existent data. And again, it just goes back to eligibility, convenience, and that kind of thing. So how do you, and please don't be offended, but how do you know any better? Either you meet the qualifications, you don't. Either you can tolerate the regimen or you can't. So beyond that, how do you have any additional information or data that the patient doesn't have?
I think it's the side effect profile often drives a lot of this. So, you know, I had a patient where he had heart failure, so the immunotherapy side effects would be more problematic, but he also had Parkinson's, so targeted therapy was going to cause joint issues for him. So you have to sort of look at the patient, and that's where we know that this drug is going to cause these side effects, which is going to make this underlying condition a little bit worse. And that, I think you're right. We go on a little bit of eligibility, but a lot more of we know how the drug is going to be tolerated in patients, and then we try to use some of that information to help you. But I'm going to pass the microphone so we can get more answers.
So, to your point, one other thing to keep in mind sometimes when trying to decide between several clinical trials, of course, assuming meeting eligibility criteria for all of them, is that unfortunately a lot of trials can be pretty strict about prior lines of treatment or what treatment you could have had and you're still eligible. So if you're trying to make a decision maybe between 2, 3 options, and if you know, if you go with trial X, having received that treatment will then make you ineligible for trial Y in the future, whereas if you did the opposite, it may not be an issue. Sometimes that's something to keep in mind. I think in general, as Dr. Patel, Dr. Sato referring to, and as discussed, the clinical trials the website's pretty helpful, although sometimes hard to navigate. I would take advantage of, typically for the trials there are contact people listed. So at Moffitt, I can't speak for every institution, but when someone emails, you know, generally that'll come to our clinical trials group and we'll be able to address that. So I know with a lot of, and my recommendation is essentially, given the rarity of this disease, I do think every patient, especially with metastatic disease, should seek an opinion from an academic cancer center. But as discussed, different centers may have different clinical trials open at the same time. So I think potentially doing some research beforehand, sending an email, and then, just because a site, clinical trials like are listed as a site has the trial open, that they may be temporarily on hold, may not be accruing, they may not be always up to date. So essentially contacting up front and saying, I read about the study, give a little bit of information, could I potentially be eligible, could you, and then you will have actually someone from that cancer center, a trial coordinator or oncologist, then will look more into it and give you more information. And sometimes we can actually do some of that, even look at some records in advance to say, okay, you may potentially qualify for this. So sometimes you can save a trip, especially if you're having to fly several hours or travel many hours to a cancer center, only to go and find out, oh, I'm actually not eligible.
From a patient standpoint, could you maybe address the difference between the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trial? Because they were kind of all grouped together up there, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So traditionally, increasingly there's been a little bit more overlap between phase 1, 2, and 3, but traditionally, phase 1 trials are the ones that are kind of first in humans. So those may be drugs that have been animal testing up to that point, and now there's approval to actually try them for the first time in humans. And oftentimes, traditionally the primary goal with those is finding safe doses. What dose can we give to humans that's relatively safe, and kind of efficacy and activity are more secondary. Now, it can get a little bit more complicated with phase 1B trials, and oftentimes with drugs with involvement of pharmaceutical companies, of course, they also want an idea of efficacy as well. So sometimes even phase 1 trials can have that built in, where not just we're going to find a safe dose, but then how effective is this? Phase 2 trials are typically further along. You have a dose that's been determined from earlier testing to be safe, and now you're exploring it further, to look at activity. How likely is this drug to shrink tumors of this cancer type? Does it improve time to disease progression, survival? And then typically phase 3 is kind of generally the gold standard in terms of, those tend to be randomized clinical trials where you may be comparing your drug of choice to whatever standard treatment may be, which sometimes becomes more challenging in cancers where there's not really a great standard treatment. But generally that's the last phase of clinical trial testing, phase 4 being after FDA approval. But once a drug has shown effectiveness, typically in phase 3 testing, is generally when it then goes for FDA approval. Again, sometimes that can be a little bit different. There are drugs that have been so effective in earlier phase 1, 2 trials that they have been FDA approved, but that's essentially the difference between 1, 2, and phase 3 trials.
So I'm wondering if there's any kind of tips or, because obviously this whole, I don't like this thing, just
I tried to help you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm wondering if there's any kind of tips or anything, because like with our situation, and I'm sure that we are not unique, we're feeling a huge sense of urgency at this point in our journey. It seems very, very overwhelming when you go to the website and you're looking at everything, or even in some of our Facebook groups, we have like a spreadsheet of all these different trials and little notes on them and everything, but even looking at that seems extremely overwhelming. And everybody keeps talking about second and third opinions and so on and so forth, and we very much trust Dr. Sato. We love Dr. Sato. We're definitely team Dr. Sato over here. But I am wondering, like, are there any kind of tips when you're looking at all of this to, like, sort through this mess? Because obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I know in our situation, he has been very sick lately. We have a 2-year-old, so I'm exhausted and running all over the place. And then suddenly at the end of the night when you're exhausted, sick, looking at the computer screen at this mess of stuff going, what? Like, I'm not even sure I can think anymore at this point. So, and normally I consider myself a rather intelligent, knowledgeable person, but this is all very just overwhelming. So what, like when we're starting this and feeling that way and we're faced with an amount of urgency, any ideas, any? I'm just, some of these tips are like, how do we start this? How do we, when we're looking at that computer screen and we're trying to sort through this mess so that we can then take them to Dr. Sato, or if we do choose to go visit Dr. Patel, and we're taking this list saying, hey, we're interested in this, but how do we even get there? Like, how do we even, it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, if I may, can you hear me here? No, okay.
Here, better. I mean, obviously you have a great advocate here who's going to tell you Dr. Patel has this option, that option, and we don't always know everything in real time. I mean, I might have a trial that might be on hold at the moment. So your home physician can be one of your best allies, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask, are there any trials anywhere else that I should be considering? You know, as I say, we don't have an ego about this. We want the best outcome for all of you guys, not the top billing on a clinical trial. But the other thing is, I would say organizations like A Cure in Sight are your best advocates. It's not like breast cancer where there's going to be a group in your church and then also in your city, and there's going to be a 5-10 Ks in the month of October. I mean, you will really have to dig to find the advocacy groups, but A Cure in Sight is really doing incredible things, as are some of the other ocular melanoma sites, in developing things like patient navigators, clinical trial navigators, things like that. So that might be a good place to be your starting point. You know, check with A Cure in Sight and say, we just need a list of the metastatic trials. We're completely overwhelmed with this website. And, you know, I know some other organizations actually have somebody who will say, okay, I'll get back to you in 48 hours. Here's the list of stuff. Here's the hospitals that have these trials that you can go through. So, I mean, what I hear you saying is you guys are shouldering a lot of this, which I'm sorry to hear, and that does happen in rare cancers. The more these rare cancer coalitions can really start to help offer you some sort of navigation through the rare disease journey, I think the better. You can call in your village of, you know, uveal melanoma advocates for you. I think that part of this too is because we're actually in Georgia and we've been going to Jefferson because in Georgia we're not having a positive experience with getting anything done, even though we were told that there was a huge sense of urgency at the beginning of this. I mean, they had our scans scheduled over a month out when they were telling us it was urgent to get him treated immediately if we were going to save his life. And now we're at a point where we're almost beyond that and we're looking for other options. And it's just, our experience has been our own, advocating for ourselves has actually been the best, because had we not educated ourselves and gotten to Jefferson, I actually truly believe we wouldn't be here at this conference right now. So that's why I was trying to.
You want to talk first?
I have one question. As a general rule, you guys are at the top of your field. I mean, you're experts in this field. How are other countries comparing as far as these treatments go? Because there are people all over the world who have this disease. Do you guys have access to their trials, to what they're doing?
Yeah, there's some good international uveal melanoma meetings that we attend throughout the year. And I mean, roughly speaking, we have similar options. American patients can go over for European trials, but it's things like Immunocore, Delcath, you know, immuno-oncology, immunotherapy. It's stuff that you've heard or might have access to in the US. Maybe the Delcath trial wouldn't be a randomized one. Of course, now that's changed in the US. So we do keep up with what other countries are doing. I think that's crucial. Even back when Dr. D'Amato was developing the MLPA and we didn't yet have the Castle Class 1, Class 2, or the impact genetics testing, it was very important to hear why they preferred testing like MLPA, you know, over fish chromosome testing. So we do meet regularly. We also meet with the Australians typically once every couple of years because they also do things a little differently down under, you know. So yeah, we do try to keep up with it.
Thank you.
Well, in Europe, where Delcath is, it's $50,000 a treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't matter if it's in the liver or it's out of the
Right.
liver. Like here, I think it still is if it got out of the liver, you can't get it. But I
Few
mean,
cents,
$50,000 a treatment and getting over there, you know. But I mean, I went to the same hospital they're going to, and I hurried up and went to Dr. Sato. And I don't have meds because you have to kind of use your own head. And when you talk to these oncologists, and I had just found out, I've never seen cancer in my family, so I was devastated. And when you're talking to an oncologist and they say, we don't have anything, and you know, I asked about Delcath because I'd come to one of these meetings, and they said, well, you know, that's randomized, and if you don't get it, you know, and they told people to go home and make memories. And that's what made me get on a plane and go to Dr. Sato. And I try to, on that Facebook site, tell everybody to do that. I say, you know what, you need to get on a plane and go find a doctor, I mean, I know about all these doctors. Don't just stay someplace for somebody to tell you you're gonna die.
Yeah, I mean, I think that advocacy that you're doing, you know, you're kind of doing it on your own, but you're helping the community hear that the answer you get in your backyard doesn't have to be the final answer. I mean, if you're able to get to a second opinion to a specialist, the problem right now is there's not a whole lot of specialists. You know, you have a choice list of maybe a handful or a couple of handfuls of people. And I really, you know, worry about people in certain parts of the country that just don't have anybody that they can get to. But I think the more you can explain, you don't have to be okay with the answer, make memories. There will be places that have trials that would be wanting to treat you. So, but connecting early, you know, early in your journey, connecting so that if there is news down the road that you need to treat, you're already locked into a place. That's key. Yeah.
Given that there's no FDA-approved drug, is there anything currently in a phase 3 trial?
There's a couple. Yeah.
So there's a lot of hope there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I should pass this microphone on. There's a couple in phase 3. You know, Immunocore is in phase 3 and Delcath is in phase 3.
I think we are much better than before.
Yeah.
Phase 3 is Delcath. Delcath is approved in Europe, $50,000. And Delcath was not approved in this country because they have crossover. They didn't show any survival benefit. So they are not, you know, doing crossover right now. So hopefully this could be approved. I cannot talk 5 more minutes. Okay, and then Immunocore called this phase 2, but this is kind of a final stage. And if show some efficacy, they should approve it. And I'm going to talk a little bit. So since they are sitting in front of me, important thing is try to find some best team, including you. You know, just find out the primary doctor, find out eye doctor, find out oncologist who are thinking of you, you know, because each patient is different. The goal of life is different, you know, so therefore the best way to keep the life intact as long as possible, that's an issue. So clinical trials, nothing available basically, and then doctor cannot tell anything because some conflict of interest and such and such, cannot, you know, but sell it, you know, we have, like she's saying. So at least you have to find out if possible, what the name of medicine is, what kind of action is, why they are using it. Kind of, you can talk to doctor and then whether these trials at least worth doing. And the most kind of important information is from the medical doctor, medical oncologist. Medical oncologist, if you are serious, bring some kind of trial, and then they might say something. And then if they don't know anything about that, probably you have to go to the key site, like MD Anderson, Jefferson. Then doctor is going to review everything to see whether that is, maybe beneficial. And then I have to say, there's no standard care, but we do have a standard care, Jefferson. We have a liver-directed treatments. As I show you, is a so-called, not the clinical trial data, just whole clinical data showing the survival benefit. So we may choose that, instead of clinical trial, if that is really beneficial to the patient. Also, some patients may need radiation for palliation, and that kind of quality of life kind of stuff. I think best thing that I want to just tell you is try to develop the best team. Not including efficacy, but also quality of life. What's your goal is. So that's my message.
Sorry, time for one more?
Yeah.
Question? Okay. So one of the options that I became aware of, I don't know, last year, maybe a little bit longer, where there are groups out there like Dr. Hartmut.
Stecher.
Yeah, Dr. Stecher, yeah. I mean, of course that comes at a price and a premium to allow him to basically look at the field out there of trials and options across the world. I've talked to him several times, never officially done anything, because it's a resource, right? Money is a limited resource. It's certainly not covered by insurance. But he certainly claims to be that advocate and have that team behind him. And I guess I'm wondering what the opinion of the panel is. Is that money well spent, or is, do I already have the right team in front of me and the right people to provide me with the same data?
Good question.
Yeah. I think that's maybe subject to each family's own kind of resources, as you say. For certain, you have the right team. I mean, you have the top expert, in the country working on your care. So you don't have to worry, are you getting any sort of, are you getting the top information? Yes. But as your wife kind of spoke to, it's like a fire hydrant. And what Dr. Stecher and cancer treatment navigators can do is they can help kind of filter that so you can digest it. He can start to see the forest view and say, okay, there are a dozen, steps, but if we do these first steps, we can't do the end steps. So he can start to kind of organize things. When we work with his group, the best thing is that it doesn't add to a patient's visit. He listens in on the phone call, and then he might follow up with one or two scientific questions, for me that I can answer very briefly with him. And then he follows back with you with really good kind of detailed layman's issues or explanations. But if you are getting everything you need, from your hospital, you don't necessarily need to engage Dr. Stecher or anybody like a cancer navigator. Though I think when you start to feel like, I'm not absorbing this, this is like a fire hydrant, it's just everything is coming at me, that's where you can try to call a Cure Insight, Cure Ocular Melanoma, Dr. Stecher's group, and say, I need some help filtering the information I'm getting. It's just too much.
But he's not going to, I guess, in your opinion, he's not going to reveal an option that probably this panel doesn't know about. He's not, there's no secret out there, right, that he's going to say, oh, this is kind of, nobody knows about this kind of thing.
Because it's one of us running those trials,
Okay.
So at your top places, we will have a sense of what the options are. But if you're at a, rural hospital in Georgia where they see one of these cases every 5 years, then you need a Dr. Stecher, or you need a hospital that really can lay the land for you.
Sure.
Were you at Winchester?
For a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's Emory. it's not an out-of-the-way hospital.
True.
I mean, you know,
True.
and we Winship.
And we can always communicate with each other as well in terms of, you know, if you come to see us for second opinion, third opinion, again, we may not have a study, but then I can email Dr. Patel, you know, other oncologists, you know, who see these patients and say, right now we don't have something good, but here's all the information. Do you have a study open? And then sometimes that helps in terms of more quickly getting in appointments. So there's been other patients, you know, who come to Moffitt, maybe, you know, they may not have qualified for the Immunocore study or the DELCAT study, which, you know, some fairly strict criteria. And then we reached out to other oncologists across the country and said, okay, we have this patient, you know, a really great trial candidate. Would they work for the TILT study, for example, that they have up in Pennsylvania or some other study? And we've sent, you know, as long as the person was willing, able to travel, which is, you know, another challenge, then we've also referred to other cancer centers, and that's never any problem.
Okay, thank you.
Are we done?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you contact or talk to the doctors afterwards? We're pushing.
Just one general question. Can I sneak it in really quick?
Oh, maybe 4 weeks.
Just, it's really quick, I promise.
Not even.
So, long term, I know I can't use the word cure, right? It's more of a control at this point. From a long-term strategy, are you seeing somewhat better results from drugs versus targeted therapies versus using your own T cells within tumors? I know that might be a loaded question, but any thoughts on that?
It's loaded. It's loaded. There's not a quick answer for it, but the brief answer is the survival, the landmark survival, you know, year after year is improving even in stage 4 disease. So I mean, you know, there's just loads of data to show, but there are 1-year survival curves that are getting better and better with treatment.
In wrapping up, I just came late, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating anything. Thank you, Sapna, for the comments for a cured site.
Sure.
I hear about advocacy and all, and you should never feel you're alone. And a cured site has a program called Cure Companions, and we can match you up with somebody who's been there before. And if you don't meet people here that you connect with, contact me or Melody or Cure Site. If you're wondering if you're getting good care, there's 2 sites. I'll back up. Pick up our new brochure, and it's got a listing of contacts, where you can go for help, where you can go for information. We have on our website and on Elizabeth's site, we have tabbed all the doctors we work with, and we have had amazing doors open for us at Cure Site. And centers of excellence, these are the doctors that you're looking at. So Dr. Hartmut Stecker, I work with, and he has now joined us as a consultant, and we are funding research as much as we can. You know, we're the smallest, one of the smallest, rarest cancers, and there's 3 or 4 groups after a split of $1 out there. So we are looking for private funding so that we can help doctors with their research. So we're trying every angle we can. So help yourself, come and we'll help you. So let's hear it for our doctors today.